Carriacou and P.D. Martinic. And I now invite the MP for St. Andrew Northeast to make her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, let me just say that I spy a spy, and it reminds me of the invasion of privacy investigation that you have not yet updated the House on. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the wonderful people of St. Andrew Northeast and that of all the working class people of Grenada who have been battered by rising inflation, a touted economic growth from which many have not felt the effect, and a general economic climate which has hope in short supply. But before I go any further, Mr. Speaker, I must address the statements made by the Honorable Member for St. Andrew Southwest in attempting to manipulate the numbers and mislead the people of this country. He proudly stood before this House, boasting of a current account surplus, yet conveniently ignoring the fact that we are running an over-budget deficit. Let me break it down, Mr. Speaker. A current account surplus means nothing. It means very little when you have a government that is spending beyond its means, accumulating debt, and failing to invest in real economic growth. What the member did, Mr. Speaker, was cherry-picking figures to paint a false picture of our economic stability, while the reality is the country's finances are in a dangerous state. I refer the member to page 13 of the budget document that clearly states the facts. Primary deficit after grants, EC $208.6 million. Overall deficit after grants, EC $337.4 million. And that is the deficit that our opposition leader alluded to. Mr. Speaker, the budget is made up of recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. And yes, there is an overall deficit. Just maybe, Mr. Speaker, the member, before wanting to teach the whole building, the whole cabinet, the whole members of parliament, and update them and educate them on current account, he must update his knowledge. I would rest that there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just have a few words for the member of Carriacou and P.D. Martinic, who I can't find the words to describe his style of presentation. But I just want to remind him that when he's boasting about 9 months achievement here and there, it was only 14 days after Crift insurance money was made available as a result of the vision and foresight of this administration here. So yes, you are able to achieve so many things 9 months later on as a result. But I want to find out from you, why after 9 months, only 3 houses were delivered to your people? Why your people are still waiting after 9 months? During those 9 months, Mr. Speaker, we will not speak about the alleged wasted millions of dollars. He would not boast about that one. But do you know, Mr. Speaker, that after 9 months, the hospital or the health center in Petit Martinique still waiting for attention 9 months later? Mr. Speaker, the budget presentation painted a picture that was not in sync with our people's lived realities. An economic environment where it is becoming more and more difficult to make 2 ends meet. The year under review has been one of runaway inflation, rising costs from the sidewalks to the supermarkets, excessive and wasteful government spending, and not enough investment in our productive sectors. While this is happening, Mr. Speaker, they are handing out largesse to friends, families, and favorites, the FFFs. Mr. Speaker, 2024 indeed was a bumper year for 1%. The people who run shadow companies to get government contracts, and the few who can afford to buy properties paying cash immediately. So yes, these handful of people are having the time of their lives. But for the others, they have been fed sweet talk only to digest a sour economy. Coming from a challenging year, Mr. Speaker, the other 99% were looking forward to hear a package that provided both hope and relief. But from all appearances, we are into another year of Banyan Bay. The Minister for Finance, in his presentation, said the package reflects Grenada rising. Grenada resilient and rising? Something like that. The question is, Mr. Speaker, rising for who? Rising for who, Mr. Speaker? Because the slogan does not represent it does not resonate with the people of Paradise. Neither Tivoli or Carriacou, neither the Pauls and La Poterie, and neither the hundreds who have been victimized and marginalized, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sadly, the gravy train has not reached the people I represent. The slogan Grenada Rising does not resonate with the people who have to travel on the worst roads they have seen in a decade. Our health care that desperately needs intensive care. It's not Grenada rising. It is prices rising, inflation rising, and victimization rising, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we wholeheartedly acknowledge the resilience of our people. Because through this economic hardship, the social struggles and the broken promises, they have persevered. So yes, our people are resilient. However, Mr. Speaker, resilience alone is not enough. And the truth is, under these current governance policies, we are not rising. A nation must not only withstand challenges, but we must rise above them. Right now, Mr. Speaker, we are falling, heading down a precipice, because people continue to struggle and many have been left behind. For the past 2.5 years, government has abandoned key sectors critical to our people's progress. They have abandoned the very people they swore to represent. But as if waking up from a deep sleep, they present a budget hoping that we forget their inaction, hoping that we forget their neglect, the hardship, and the economic pain. But the people remember, and we will not allow them to rewrite history, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget is not a roadmap for prosperity. It's an attempt to cover up failure. It's an admission by this government that for the past 2.5 years, I think it's more, I just say in half, but it's almost 3 years. This government did very little to address the real struggles of our people. And now, they believe, they want us to believe, they expect us to believe, Mr. Speaker, that it will all be fixed with one budget document, one budget speech, and the AI hospital. Mr. Speaker, all people know better. Today, Mr. Speaker, I will speak on a few areas this government has ignored and mismanaged, focusing my attention on youth development and sports, housing, social development, and education. These are not just sectors of an economy. They are the very pillars for which a strong, thriving nation is built. And yet, under this administration, these pillars have crumbled due to poor planning, misplaced priorities, and a failure to listen to the needs of the people. We are not here just to criticize, Mr. Speaker. We are here to stand up for those whose voices have been silenced by the economic hardship and the fear of victimization. We are here to hold this government accountable, and we are here to demand that the resilience of our people must be matched with policies that truly allows them to rise. Mr. Speaker, this budget is too little, too late. And no amount of political spin will erase the reality that for the past 2.5 years, this government has failed our people. The people deserve more than resilience. They deserve progress. And for that, we will continue to fight for. Let's look at youth and sports, Mr. Speaker, a sector that should be the foundation of national development. But instead, it has been neglected, abandoned, and now exploited for political convenience. You're talking about a mock youth elections. No legal authority, just some mock youth elections, a continuation of our mock Youth Parliament. The government would have us believe that this budget is the turning point for young people, and it is filled with new opportunities, new investment, and a commitment to their future. But let us not be fooled by flashy figures, because for the past 2.5 years, this current administration has done nothing or very little to invest in youth development. And even worse, Mr. Speaker, they have dismantled all of the programs and projects that were designed to empower our young people. Let's look at the facts, Mr. Speaker. Under our administration, there are many well-established programs which provided training, mentorship, and employment opportunities for our young people. We can speak about the New Imani program, Empower, Project Fly, Youth Biz, just to name a few. These programs were making a difference. They were creating jobs. They were equipping our young people with skills that they needed in order to succeed. Yes, some of them had challenges, and there will always be challenges in any program. However, these programs benefited thousands of young people. Today, you can look for them all over the various sectors. There are teachers, there are bankers, there are police officers. Some of them are entrepreneurs, Mr. Speaker. But what did the government do? They shut down the programs, no real alternatives, not even an explanation. Just abandonment, Mr. Speaker. As a result, youth unemployment has skyrocketed. And I remember the Minister for Finance quoted the national unemployment figures. He never quoted the youth unemployment figures, conveniently so, Mr. Speaker. Our young people are frustrated, demoralized, and they are struggling to find opportunities in a country that should be investing in them. Mr. Speaker, we continued to advocate on behalf of our young people, and after several calls to restore these programs, we saw the return of the Empower program for young men. But at a reduced budget of $2.5 million in 2024, and even with a reduced budget, they only spent $1.1 million underspending on the young men at risk who need that type of intervention, Mr. Speaker. You know what that means? Fewer young men participated in the program, and that created missed opportunities and even deeper struggles for them. And we wonder today why we are seeing an increase in crime and violence. It's simply because of the underspending and the underinvesting in our young men. Mr. Speaker, our communities are at risk as a result. In 2025, we have seen the budget move from 2.5 in 2024 to 3.5. I'm happy. We are just hoping that they are not underspending again. Because what we have seen before, the funds were allocated. Yes, they were approved for spending. But what happened? It was underspent. So if we fail to deliver then, how do you think we will convince the young men that they will deliver today? That's a question we must ask, Mr. Speaker. I must remind the Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that throughout our years administering that program, over $5 million were invested for this program because we wanted to ensure we captured every young man who needed that type of engagement, exposing them to a variety of contemporary skills that they needed to function effectively in our country. Mr. Speaker, 2 years, not one new person was taken into the new Imani program. 2 years, thousands of young people graduated from school, and there were little to no opportunities to enhance themselves. After 2 years, we heard almost 3 years, but let me leave it 2.5, 3 years. They know the facts. After almost 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the program is thrown out the door. Yes, we did not see. I went through the budget, up, down, front, center, side. I've been looking. Not one mention of the new Imani program. So it is now thrown out the door, Mr. Speaker. But I heard there is an alternative. But let me say to this House, this alternative program will never be able to bring the benefits to our young people as what the new Imani program did for them. If we look carefully, Mr. Speaker, already, when you compare the amount allocated, it's like chalk and cheese. Over $20 million are for the new Imani compared to $2 million budgeted for this new program. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, a significantly high number of young people are left out of this program. Because number one, they say it's just for females. Number two, it is only 18 to 25. So, when we look at it, we see it as a grave injustice done to the young people of this country. One that reflects government's total disregard for their future. For years, a program that provided real opportunities, training, and empowerment for young people was in place. It gave them hope, created jobs for thousands of them, developed their skills, and steered them in the right direction. Today, just without any cause, it's discarded and replaced with a weaker, underfunded alternative that offers little to no support. Mr. Speaker, our young people are not blind. They know they are being shortchanged. So by slashing the funding and replacing a well-established program with a weaker alternative, this government is sending a clear message to them. And that is, they are not a priority. Mr. Speaker, where is Project FLY, fostering level-headed youth? Another important project just discarded. One that directly benefited the most vulnerable young people among us, our youth at risk. For years, a community-based program that existed to meet the men and women where they are on their turf in their communities, offering mentorship, skills training, and a lifetime away from crime, violence, and hopelessness. You see, Mr. Speaker, even though I didn't understand the program, they could have asked for help to administer it to the young people, because this program understood the realities of our communities, that work on the ground with our young people that was facing such great risk, and yet a government with its lack of vision and commitment to young people chose to get rid of it. Instead of strengthening the program and expanding it to make a real difference, they dismantled it, leaving behind nothing comparable. And the consequences of this reckless decision, Mr. Speaker, we are already feeling it. More young people are left behind, and our crime rate is rising. This program was not just a name on a budget document. It was a direct intervention into the lives of the people who needed it the most. It led them in their communities, provided mentorship and skills development. When I think about the people from La Poultry, Montreat, Saigon, Gun Battle, all of these communities, Mr. Speaker, they depend heavily on Project Fly. And I just want to make reference to a young man when we went to St. John's to deliver that program. You know, we met the young man in his community, Mr. Speaker. You know where he is today? He's employed by the Ministry of Youth. He's a youth parliamentarian and a youth ambassador. This is just one of the success stories from this program. Mr. Speaker, while other nations are equipping their young people to compete in a modern economy, this government is leaving ours to fend for themselves. Let's look at sports, Mr. Speaker. The same can be said for sports. Another failure, another glaring failure in this government's budget. Its continued neglect of the sporting sector for the past almost 3 years. And every budget come, you would hear a great announcement of investment in sporting facilities, programs for athletes' development. Mr. Speaker, the government has promised to prioritize sports as a tool for youth development and national pride. But Mr. Speaker, what really is the reality of the situation? Let's look at it. In 2024, the approved estimates for repairs to hard courts were $300,000, but only $98,771 was spent. This is only 33% of what was approved, Mr. Speaker. You know, we are in 2025 with the same $300,000 again. Mr. Speaker, in 2024, the budget estimate for the construction of a swimming pool was $500,000. You know how much was spent, Mr. Speaker? I want you to take a look at the budget document. $0.00. Could you help me with the percentage there, Mr. Speaker? Yet, last Friday, when it was announced by the Minister for Finance, table breaking, like if nobody journalists were in the building, you know, Mr. Speaker. So if you look at it, they did not spend the $500,000 last year, but they come back with $800,000 to spend this year, Mr. Speaker. How can we believe that they didn't deliver last year? How can we believe that they would deliver this year? What is it they're going to use to convince Grenadians that they mean what they say and they will do what is in the budget document? Mr. Speaker, in 2024, $1.1 million were budgeted for the lighting of the cricket stadium. And they love when these things are non-stable, breaking, hand breaking, just because it sounds good, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, how much was spent? Not $1 was spent on that, Mr. Speaker. But we are here for 2025 with a budgeted amount of $8.2 million. Mr. Speaker, so for the past 2.5 years, they made promises. The budgets were allocated. Yet, at the end of the fiscal year, the actual spending fell far below what was budgeted. No, as if they are hoping that we will forget They return with the same budgeted figures and more in some cases, expecting us to believe that this time, maybe this time, they will deliver. Mr. Speaker, our sporting facilities have deteriorated. And I would draw your attention to some of these facilities. I see the member from St. Patrick's paying keen attention because he knows the full playing field. The Vendom playing field, we wonder what is really is trial and error in Vendom going on. Every time we pass there, we're wondering, well, what's next? It's basically trial and error in Vendom. And we cannot forget the Hillsborough playing field, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, imagine in 2025, the McDonald's College last Friday held the school sports, the annual athletic schools championship in Progress Park, St. Andrew. A school from St. Patrick have to come all the way to St. Andrew to have their school sports. So it is the realities on the ground, not what is said in the budget speech or not only noise they are making, the realities. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, the parish sports, the St. Patrick's Primary School parish sports were held, you know where, Mr. Speaker? In the constituency of St. Andrew Northeast at the La Poultry playing field. And this was only possible, Mr. Speaker, because of the vision and foresight of this administration, the LNP administration, to upgrade and expand this playing field, including its lighting up. I hear people taking credit for lighting by the community, and the people who live there, we just have a good laugh, because we know better. Mr. Speaker, let me highlight yet another example of this government's reckless decision-making in regard and disregard for our communities, our athletes, and our young people. In the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, I just listened to a member talking about the debris and everything. The government had a responsibility to clean up, rebuild, and restore normalcy to the lives of the people. Instead, they made an inexcusable decision to use a playing field, a vital space for sports and community engagement, as a dumping ground. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. No one disputes the need for proper debris management after a natural disaster. I'm not disputing that. But there were dump freeze right there. They could have you put the debris there. But listen, Mr. Speaker, the decision was to store the debris on the playing fields, which is a space meant for young people, sporting events and community engagements. Mr. Speaker, this is not a shot of short-sightedness and irresponsibility. The negative impact of this government's failure to properly plan for debris disposal has been devastating. By turning this field into a debris site, the government has destroyed an essential public resource. The very ground where athletes train, where communities gather for sporting events, and where our next generation of stars, sporting stars, played, is now unusable. But Mr. Speaker, we have heard it right here, and I've seen some social media boasting that the field is being restored. But Mr. Speaker, that is an additional burden on our taxpayers. Money that could have been spent on developing sports rather than fixing an avoidable mistake. The government has failed our athletes on the Sister Isle, and they will never forget this. We do hope, Mr. Speaker, that measures will be put in place to ensure such reckless decision never happens again. Mr. Speaker, this budget does not signal real commitment to our young people. It is a desperate attempt to erase 2.5 years of neglect. But the young people of our country remember. They remember the lost opportunities. They remember the broken promises. And they remember a government that turned its back on them when they needed support the most. Mr. Speaker, this government loves to boast about sports tourism, but when it truly mattered, when the Grenada Invitational Games that would have showcased our nation on a world stage needed additional support, they failed to deliver. The cancellation of an event that would have brought athletes, fans, and economic opportunities to our shores. How can they claim to be champions of sports tourism when the inactions led to a major loss for the sporting community, local businesses, and our international reputation? Mr. Speaker, events like these require more than just words. It requires real commitment, real investment, and real action. Over the years, we have enjoyed the likes of Lushan Merritt, Shelley and Fraser Price, Justin Gatlin, alongside our very own Kirani James with those games. Mr. Speaker, this was a chance for the government to prove that sports tourism is more than just a talking point in the budget speech. It was an opportunity to stimulate the economy, to create jobs and inspire our young athletes. Yet, they sat on the sidelines and watched the Grenada Invitational slip away. We stand firmly with the young people of our country. And we believe in a budget that truly invests in them, not just in words, Mr. Speaker, but in action. We believe in restoring and expanding the programs to provide real training, real jobs, and real opportunities. We believe in funding sports development in a way that empowers our athletes, strengthens our community, and gives young people a reason to dream again. Our track record is clear, Mr. Speaker. We don't just believe that, and we don't just give words. Mr. Speaker, we built 2 top-class stadium for us, and one of them is fully lit, so they're boasting about lighting the other one. The cricket one, that's okay. The athletic one is already fully lit. Work done by this administration, the new National Party administration in government. Mr. Speaker, let's look at housing. Housing, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by something that I would never forget. We will never forget government's decision to take away the low-income houses and sell it to individuals who can afford bank loans. This was nothing short of a betrayal of the very people who need the homes the most. This housing project, a generous donation from the People's Republic of China, was intended to provide shelter and security for Grenada's most vulnerable citizens, not to be turned into a profit-making scheme for those who already are financially stable. So it hurts, Mr. Speaker, This move by government was an attack on the very poor and working class families who have been struggling to make ends meet. And instead of helping to lift them out of poverty, the administration deliberately pushed them further into hardship. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the budget document has an estimated amount of $25 million for housing. However, half of it is allocated towards the so-called, quote-unquote, Project 500. Half of it. That is the intention to sell for those who can afford, right? Mr. Speaker, Project 500 is government's latest attempt to rely on existing housing program while forcefully reacquiring lands from citizens who already legally purchased it. Is nothing more than a blatant exercise of deception and mismanagement. This is not a new initiative. It is simply repackaging an old program and give the illusion of progress while wasting public resources. Mr. Speaker, you know they're very good at repackaging and renaming. CBI is now IMA. Debushing is now beautification. Bathroom and toilet is now wash. Mr. Speaker, this reckless approach raises serious concerns. How much of our taxpayers' money are spent on rebranding existing programs? We have to ask ourselves that, Mr. Speaker. But we must remind them that they promised 500 Grenadian-style houses per year under such a project. However, to date, and you know Dunfermline is my backyard, so Mr. Speaker, I have video evidence on my phone if I need to submit it to the House. But I would say the Minister for Finance stated that only 17 houses they were able to start. Only 17. But Mr. Speaker, because I live right there, and because I know the role of the Housing Authority, before government change in 2022, the Housing Authority was already preparing for the construction of 16 homes in that same area. So they quickly adopted that and renamed it, rebrand it, and said that Project 500, because budget coming up, we are not nothing, we're giving all the 3 months, do something quick. This is total deception, Mr. Speaker. And the facts must be put out there. But you know the thing about it, Mr. Speaker? One of the workers at the Housing Authority, he was so angry, he just walked away. He said, this is not how they operate. They operate according to procedures, according to rules. So when they're given the mandate to just do things busy, because we need something to show, he said no. If you're going to do something, let's do it good. So he walked away, Mr. Speaker. He walked away from the Housing Authority, which he worked for many years. They will find out the facts. Mr. Speaker, this government is quick to boast about build back better. But let us be clear on this. The money the government is using to build back better is not as a result of their planning. It is because of the thrift insurance secured by our administration while in office. So yes, that was geared to indeed build back better. You have no choice but to build back better because you have immediate finance upon which you can do so, Mr. Speaker. Without that, they would have no way of providing the housing assistance needed for the hurricane victims. So instead of pretending that this is their achievement, they should acknowledge that they are merely reaping the benefits of responsible governance of our administration. Mr. Speaker, Without this financial safety net, the rebuilding efforts would have been much more difficult. A government should not just be judged on how they spend money, Mr. Speaker. They should be judged on how they plan for the future. Build Back Better exists today only because planning was done by our administration. The government is proven that they have no vision of their own. They are simply spending resources that we secure. The question the people of this country needs to ask Mr. MIT, what will you leave behind for the next generation to use in such instances? That's the question they should ask. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to social development. Mr. Speaker, the true measure of a government is how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. Yet, this administration, after making grandiose promises the world back there that you should not be earning less than $650, upon coming into office, one of the first things they did was to remove $150 from the seed beneficiaries. We will never forget this, and I think everybody going forward, we should remind them. We ask this government, what happened to the promise that you made? How can you justify cutting benefits from elderly, single parents, and low-income families while increasing spending elsewhere? Mr. Speaker, this government, while they speak about commitment to social development, have you noticed, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it has come up again, at every stop, every village, every bus stop, well, they put some solar lights, so it has been used in a way that maybe it was not intended for, Mr. Speaker. But we have seen an alarming rise in gambling amongst our people and the most vulnerable in our communities. Every shop, every abandoned building, every house, every bus stop, Mr. Speaker, is transformed into a gambling house. Mr. Speaker, what is the plan of this government to address this crisis? What are the policies they are using to protect families who are watching their loved ones lose hard-earned money to unchecked gambling? Some may make profits under this industry, but there are far too many broken homes and financial instability and increasing crime as a result, Mr. Speaker. And this government must take responsibility for the unchecked expansion of gambling because it's harming our communities, Mr. Speaker. We therefore call for stronger regulations, greater community support programs, and real investment in education, youth development, so that all people do turn to gambling as the only hope, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, education. This government stood before us boasting, Mr. Speaker, about free tuition. Yet, the reality paints a very different picture. In 2024, they approved $3 million for this initiative, the free tuition initiative. But in 2024, shockingly, only $772,471 of those funds were used up by the students, a mere 26%. What this tells us, Mr. Speaker, it tells us that this government is more concerned about making grand announcements rather than ensuring real access to education. We ask the question, Why only 25% was used up last year? Is it because the system is too complicated? Are there any hidden barriers preventing the students from accessing the support? We indicated that free tuition by itself will not make education fully accessible. Transportation and meals must complement it for some students. Mr. Speaker, was it just another empty promise designed to sound good in a budget speech that is never properly implemented? These are the questions we must ask. Mr. Speaker, education is the foundation of national development. And if this government is really serious about it, they would not just throw numbers around. They would ensure that every eligible student gets the opportunity to further the education without any obstacles. Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the government taking credit for projects they did not initiate, and they don't have the audacity to acknowledge, decency, to acknowledge the work of our administration. They stand here, only now he knows government is a continuum, Mr. Speaker. They stand here boasting about the improvement in school infrastructure and the construction of new schools. But wait, they conveniently fail to mention that the funding for both phase 1 and phase 2 of the Grenada Education Enhancement Project was sourced by our NMP administration. Let us set the record straight, Mr. Speaker. Schools have already been benefiting from this funding long before this government came into office. We could speak about Montrose, the Presentation Brothers College, the Bishop's College in Carriacou, and the list can go on and on and on. The Grenada Christian Academy, the Anglican in Grenville and St. David's had its own challenges, so they were delayed, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the repairs, the expansion, the groundwork for new schools were all part of a well-planned initiative that our administration worked tirelessly to secure. It was not the vision, it was not the negotiation, and it's certainly not their achievement. Mr. Speaker, this government is attempting to rewrite history, presenting these projects as their own, while hiding the truth from the public. But the people deserve honesty. If they were truly committed to education, they would not just ride on the coattail work already done. They will bring new ideas and secure funding instead of rebranding what was already in motion. So I ask this government, what new investments have you sourced? What additional schools will you build beyond what was already planned? Or is it your only achievement repackaging the success of our administration? The people deserve answers, not deception. Education is far too important for political gains, and we here stand ready and committed to ensure that every child has access to quality learning facilities, not just through our past efforts, but through continued advocacy for real progress. Mr. Speaker, this government stood before the nation and proudly announced school meals will now be free for all students, primary, pre-primary, secondary school. They made a grand spectacle of removing $1. that the parents had to pay, claiming victory for education and social welfare. The question is, what really happened since the grand announcement? Despite increasing the budgetary allocation in 2025, the reality on the ground is far different. Schools are struggling. There are lack of resources to supply meals to students daily. And as a result, students are left without meals, the meals they were promised. Instead of benefiting from the so-called free meal program, parents are now forced to spend even more money to send their children to school with lunch. These are the facts, Mr. Speaker, because government has failed to deliver on its promise. This is a classic case of poor planning and mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. The government was very quick to make the announcement, but very slow to ensure that schools had the proper infrastructure, the proper staffing, and the resources to provide these meals. What is the point of declaring free meals, Mr. Speaker, if our students still are not receiving it? Mr. Speaker, removing a $1 contribution without ensuring the sustainability of the program has done more harm than good. It is not just good enough to make policies for headlines. They must be backed up by proper execution. And this is yet another example of a government that rushes to make announcements but fails to govern responsibly. Mr. Speaker, call on this government to ensure that going forward, that schools have the necessary resources and deliver on the promise they made to all students and parents. Because right now, the so-called free meal program is nothing more than a failed publicity stunt. Our children are the ones paying the price. Mr. Speaker, I was reading a report from the World Bank recently, and it made it very clear that Caribbean education is a crisis, and Grenada is not immune to this situation. Our students are being left behind due to outdated curriculums, ineffective teaching methods, and a system that is failing. Mr. Speaker, I'm making a point because as a country, we are not immune. I am not casting blame on any administration, but just to bring awareness.
Honorable. The standing orders demands silence when someone is on the floor. Proceed, Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our students are left behind due to outdated curriculums, ineffective teaching methods, and a system that is failing to equip them for the demands of a modern world. And if we are serious about securing our children's future, we must act now. This government cannot just continue with business as usual. We therefore strongly recommend that government engage with global partners to assist in curriculum modernization, teacher training, and digital learning integration. We cannot afford to ignore this crisis. And we, in the opposition, we stand ready to support any meaningful reform that will truly prepare our students for the future. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I ask the citizens of Grenada to reflect on the theme towards Vision 75 Grenada, resilient and rising, and rising, and rising, and rising, and rising. For whom? Because for the ordinary Grenadian, this past year has been nothing short of a struggle. The reality on the ground is very clear. Cost of living has skyrocketed, making it harder for families to afford the simple, basic things, Mr. Speaker. Victimization is at an all-time high. Our people are more afraid to speak or to seek opportunities without fear of political discrimination. Unemployment, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence for 2 to 3 minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Sorry, you have 2 minutes more.
Unemployment remains a major crisis, leaving too many young people without hope for a better future. So I ask again, who is it really rising for? It is not rising for the farmers, not the workers, not the business owners, and certainly not the struggling families. Mr. Speaker, it will be remiss of me to not extend my deepest gratitude to the wonderful people of my constituency, St. Andrew Northeast, the men, the women, the young people who continue to put their trust in me as the elected representative. Through every challenge, every hardship, we have stood together. Despite the rising cost of living, despite the neglect from this government, and despite the poor policies that have made life even harder, we remain strong, we have remained united, and we never lost hope. Mr. Speaker, I know these times are tough, so I want to say to them, do not lose hope, do not give up. Better days are coming. We will not be silenced. We will not back down. After all, we are unstoppable. And when the time comes, we will be right back, stronger and better. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP for Andrew Northeast. And I now invite the MP for St. Patrick West to take the floor as he makes his contribution.